Thank you. My writing and research over the past few years has really focused mostly on the implications of robotics and artificial intelligence for society as a whole and for the whole economy. And I really believe that we are sort of on the leading edge of a big disruption that potentially is going to put a great deal of stress on the economy because a lot of jobs are ultimately going to be threatened. So what I want to do today is talk briefly about some applications that are specific to the smart grid and to the utility industry, but then I want to expand it into really what is my primary theme and talk a bit about what it means for the whole economy and society, because I do think that that's a critical issue for many countries throughout the whole world, and certainly for India as well. Just to give you some idea of the scale of disruption that we could be talking about, there was an important estimate done by scientists at Oxford University who looked at this and came to the conclusion that in the United States and many other advanced countries, about 50% of the jobs could potentially disappear over the next 20 years or so. So that's clearly something that would be just a staggering impact both on society and on the economy. So I do think it's a critical issue. So let me begin by just giving you some examples of what's going on in the utility industry. I think the most common example that we already see is the use of aerial drones to, in surveillance and detecting problems in the grid. For example, after a storm, it's possible to send out drones and survey a very wide area in a much less time than it would take to actually send out workers to do that. And what you see here in this picture is actually a photograph of a line crawling robot that actually crawls along the grid autonomously and is able to perform inspections. It can, for example, look for grass that's too high or trees that are too low or for other damage to the lines and so forth. And this is a technology that's already being deployed, for example, in Canada, and there are a number of companies working on this. And eventually this will evolve to the point where these robots are also able to perform basic repairs, initially under remote control and perhaps eventually autonomously. So you can see how that's gradually going to become a much more disruptive technology, and how, of course, it will threaten a lot of jobs for people that now do that type of work. The other aspect of this is the use of artificial intelligence and machine learning, and you've already heard quite a bit about the use of machine learning in the smart grid, but my main point here is that because of the level of investment that you're going to see in smart grids in nations across the world, this is going to become a tremendously important platform for the development of machine learning and AI, and I think that is something that will have implications throughout the whole economy. But eventually, I think where we see this heading is that a smart grid, as it becomes more intelligent, is inherently going to become less labor intensive. You can imagine, for example, a sensor somewhere on the grid detecting a problem, a diagnostic algorithm automatically reacting to that, and perhaps sending out a robot like the one I just showed you to fix the problem. And that will all be done completely autonomously. So you can see how there will be an impact on jobs there, and that's sort of a microcosm of the whole economy. In the utility industry, you already see that, for example, with smart meters, where jobs for people who used to go out and read those meters have disappeared. So that's going to be an ongoing process that I think has implications both for the industry and also, more importantly, for the broad economy. So now, expanding a bit, let me just mention the things that I think really set today's information technology apart and why we can expect a disruption that's going to be unlike anything we've seen in the past. The first thing is that we've got this exponential acceleration going on. Of course, the Moore's law like doubling, which implies just a tremendous amount of absolute progress. The second point is that machines are, in a limited sense, beginning to think, and a lot of that is all about machine learning. Computers are now taking on cognitive tasks. It's not just about muscle power. And the third thing, and perhaps the most important thing, is that information technology is a true general purpose technology. It's ubiquitous. It's everywhere. It's going to invade the entire economy. And when you put those three qualities together, I think that what you end up with is something that actually looks like a utility. Information technology is, in a sense, a utility, and rather than just delivering electric power, it's now delivering machine intelligence. It's delivering this ability to solve problems, to learn, and increasingly that's going to make the whole economy less labor intensive, and I do think that that's a disruption that we're going to have to begin to think about. Here's a graph showing, I think, some evidence that these technologies are already having an impact. This is a comparison of productivity and compensation for typical workers in the United States. And you can see that up until the mid-1970s or so, these two lines moved together. So, you know, workers became more productive, they became more efficient, and as a result of that, they got a raise. Around the mid-1970s, that stopped being true, and these lines have now decoupled, and productivity continues to climb, but wages for many workers have completely stagnated, and people haven't gotten a raise in decades. Part of the thing that is driving that, I believe, is that there's a transition going on where machines are becoming more autonomous. Rather than simply being tools as they were in the past, in many cases, they are substituting for workers. They are able to run themselves. And what that means is that, at least relative to many workers, they're making those people less valuable instead of more valuable. And that's an important transition that's going on with our technology, and I expect that to continue. Here's a graph showing job creation in the United States, and you can see that over the last half decade or last half century or so, every decade has produced fewer jobs in percentage terms than the preceding decade. So again, there's a kind of a structural shift happening in our economy where it's just getting less and less effective at creating new jobs. And I do think that this is true. This is true in large measure because of the impact of technology. A final really important point that I think is really important for us all to be aware of and to think about is that automation is no longer just about factories or low-skilled jobs or people that don't have lots of education. There's a tremendous amount of evidence to suggest that information technology, artificial intelligence, automation in general are climbing the skills ladder. They're taking on more and more skilled work. They're taking on the types of work that are done by people who go to university and even graduate and professional school. Examples include automated journalism, where you've got smart systems that crank out news stories. And people can read those stories and not realize that they were actually generated by a machine rather than written by a person. In the legal field, there's automation. On Wall Street, most trading is now algorithmic, and that has, in fact, resulted in many job losses across the financial industry. An extreme example is radiology, which is a radiologist is a doctor that interprets medical images, and that requires a tremendous amount of training, university, then medical school, then residency, years and years and years. And yet I think that it won't be too long before radiology is likely to be a job that's done exclusively by a machine. So the point is that this is very broad-based, and it's beginning to impact people that have lots and lots of education, and that kind of upends our traditional idea of what the solution to this has always been, which is that, you know, if people are impacted by technology, then we ought to send them back to school for more training, more education, so they can do something higher level. And you know, that increasingly is going to be called into question in the future. So finally, the point then is, what should we do as a society about all of this if we're really going to face this disruption in the future? And I do think that eventually it's going to require a radical solution. You know, simply giving people more education is probably not going to work for the reason that I just pointed out. And therefore, I think that we will need to begin to consider a radical solution, perhaps something like a guaranteed income, where everyone in our society has access to at least a minimal livable income, whether or not they have a traditional job. And that's something that, you know, in many countries is kind of politically unthinkable now, but I do think that over the next couple of decades it's likely to become more viable. It's likely to become an issue that's taken much more seriously, and I think that if we adapt a solution like this, we can move into a very utopian future where people perhaps work less, but they also are much better off as a result of all these tremendous innovations that I think we're going to see over the next couple of decades. So thank you.